At a party with her husband's friends, she tried to kiss him while dancing. He pulled away and said, "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." Everyone laughed. Then he added, "You don't even meet my standards. Stay away from me." The laughter got louder. She smiled like it didn't hurt, but when she finally answered, the room went silent. Some words sting, but hers cut deeper. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. May the Almighty clothe your days with strength, your nights with peace, and your hearts with unshakable faith. May every woman be honored like a crown of creation, her voice heard, her worth celebrated, her soul never broken. May every man rise with wisdom, protect with love, and cherish the women who make this world beautiful. I pray your paths overflow with blessings, your homes shine with harmony, and your spirits never kneel to fear. You are chosen, you are powerful, and heaven itself smiles upon your name. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some prisons have golden bars. Soraya Baptiste stood in the grand dining room of the Callaway mansion, watching crystal refract light across walls that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The chandelier above her head was imported from somewhere in Europe, a detail Vivienne mentioned at every dinner party, as if geography could make glass more valuable than the woman standing beneath it. Soraya held a silver tray laden with appetizers she had not been invited to taste, serving the very people who called themselves her family, while they discussed her as if she were furniture that failed to match the decor. "She really should learn to walk properly," Delphine said, not bothering to lower her voice. Thorne's sister sat across the table, her phone angled toward Soraya, recording another moment of humiliation to share with their social circle later. "All that clumping around like she's still working some event instead of living in one." Laughter rippled through the room. Polite and poisonous, Soraya moved to the next guest, her smile fixed in place, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. She had learned to perform this role with precision over 2 years of marriage, each day teaching her new lessons in survival. "Keep your spine straight. Never let them see you flinch. Breathe through the cuts until you can no longer feel them. Soraya, darling, you missed a spot." Vivienne gestured toward the table with one perfectly manicured finger, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "We can't have crumbs at a Callaway dinner. What would people think? What would people think?" The family motto, the measuring stick by which every action was judged, every person evaluated. Soraya cleaned the invisible crumbs, while Vivienne continued her conversation about charity galas and foundation boards. Causes she supported to purchase goodwill rather than create change. Thorne sat at the head of the table where his father once presided, looking every bit the heir apparent in his tailored suit. He watched Soraya clear the table and said nothing. He always said nothing. The man who had pursued her with flowers and promises, who had sworn she was different from everyone else, who had made her believe love could bridge any divide, had evaporated the moment the wedding ended. What remained was this stranger wearing her husband's face, this hollow thing that looked through her like she was smoke. Easton, Thorne's younger brother, leaned back in his chair and gestured for Soraya to refill his wine. When she approached, he let his hand brush against her waist in a way that could be called accidental, if anyone bothered to care. "You know, Thorne, I have to admire your commitment to charity work. Most people just write checks." More laughter. Always more laughter. Soraya returned to the kitchen and set down the tray with hands that had finally started shaking. Through the doorway she could see them all, this family that had swallowed her whole and found her wanting. She pressed one hand against her stomach, against the secret growing there, against the life that had taken root during one rare night when Thorne had come to her room smelling of whiskey and loneliness. He had touched her like she mattered for those few hours, had whispered things that sounded almost like love, and then had retreated back into ice by morning, as if the night had never happened. 4 months. She had been carrying this secret for 4 months, terrified to speak it aloud because she knew exactly what would happen. Vivienne would insist on doctors who reported to the family. Delphine would make jokes about trailer park breeding. Easton would start calculating inheritance divisions. And Thorne would look at her with that same empty expression, as if she had committed some crime by daring to create a life with him. The baby fluttered, a sensation so small she might have imagined it. But it was real as the loneliness crushing her chest, as real as the marriage that had turned into a mausoleum. Soraya! Vivienne's voice cut through the kitchen. "We're waiting." She picked up the dessert tray and returned to the dining room, to the performance, to the slow death of everything she had once believed about love. The dinner crawled forward with the pace of torture. Between courses, the family discussed business matters as if Soraya were not present. Thorne talked about expansion plans and market positions, while his mother corrected his strategy with the precision of someone who had never relinquished real power. Delphine showed everyone photos from her recent trip to some island Soraya could not pronounce, each image a careful composition of wealth and beauty. Easton flirted with the woman beside him, someone's daughter from another legacy family. "Someone appropriate. You must be so proud," one of the guests said to Vivienne, gesturing vaguely around the table. "Maintaining such standards in changing times. So many families compromise now." "We believe in tradition," Vivienne replied, her eyes sliding to Soraya for just a moment. "Moon. Some things should never be diluted." The message was clear. The message was always clear. After dinner, the guests moved to the sitting room for drinks and conversation. Soraya began clearing plates, stacking them carefully, focusing on the task, because focusing kept her from screaming. She felt him before she saw him, that particular static that filled the air when Thorne entered a room. She did not look up. "You made a fool of yourself tonight," he said quietly, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. Dropping that spoon during the soup course, Soraya had not dropped a spoon. But contradicting him would only extend the conversation, and she had nothing left to give him. "I'll be more careful," she said. "You should have been more careful from the beginning." He moved closer, and for one desperate second she thought he might touch her, might show some flicker of the man he had pretended to be. "My mother thinks we should discuss your future here, her future, not their future." The distinction was intentional. What does that mean? The question escaped before she could stop it. It means you need to decide if you're capable of meeting the requirements of this family. His eyes were cold, distant, empty of anything resembling love. "Because right now, all you're doing is embarrassing us." The baby fluttered again, stronger this time, as if responding to the ice in its father's voice. "I'm your wife," Soraya said, the words barely audible. "You're a name on paper." Thorne adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture of dismissal. "Being my wife requires more than a ceremony. It requires belonging, and you've never belonged here." He walked away, leaving her standing alone with a stack of dirty plates and a truth that had been obvious from the beginning. She did not belong. She had never belonged. The courtship had been a lie, the wedding a performance, the marriage a cage dressed in silk. Soraya finished cleaning in silence. The guests eventually left, their cars disappearing down the long driveway like ships abandoning a sinking vessel. The family retreated to their separate wings of the mansion, this building so large that people could live entire lives without crossing paths. She walked through empty hallways, lined with portraits of Callaway ancestors, generations of wealth and power staring down at the woman who had dared to marry into their legacy. In her room, the one she occupied alone, while Thorne slept in the master suite 3 doors away, Soraya finally let the mask slip. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed both hands on her stomach, on the small swell that would soon become impossible to hide. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this." But even as she spoke the apology, something else stirred beneath the grief. Something harder, something that tasted like survival. She had endured 2 years of this family's cruelty. She had smiled through their insults, served their dinners, accepted their treatment because some foolish part of her had believed she could earn their respect, could make Thorne remember why he had chosen her. But tonight, listening to him reduce their marriage to a mistake, feeling the baby move inside her while he discussed her future as if she were a problem to be solved, something fundamental had shifted. She could not do this for 20 more years. She could not raise a child in this house, in this family, in this cold mockery of love. She could not watch her son or daughter learn that affection was transactional, that worth was measured in bloodlines and bank accounts, that cruelty was acceptable if delivered with proper etiquette. The realization settled over her like a blanket, heavy and suffocating and strangely clarifying. She had to leave. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Leave the mansion, leave the money, leave the name that had become a noose around her neck. Take nothing but herself and the life growing inside her and disappear into a world that might be kinder than this golden prison. But first, she had to survive one more night, one more morning, one more day in this house where love had died before it ever truly lived. Soraya lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, too exhausted to change, too broken to care. Tomorrow, she would begin planning. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to escape with nothing but hope and determination. Tomorrow, she would start building the life she should have demanded from the beginning. But tonight, she closed her eyes and let herself mourn the man she had thought she married, the family she had thought she would join, the future she had thought they would build together. She mourned it all, this beautiful lie that had slowly poisoned everything it touched. Outside her window, the mansion grounds stretched into darkness. Somewhere in this enormous house, Thorne slept without thinking of her. Somewhere, Vivian planned new ways to remind Soraya of her place. Somewhere, Delphine edited videos that would humiliate her tomorrow. Somewhere, Easton dreamed of inheritances and empires. And here, in this small room that felt more like a cell than a sanctuary, Soraya Baptiste made a promise to the child growing inside her. They would survive this. Whatever it took, however hard the path, they would survive this family and build something better from the ashes. She did not know yet that survival would require more courage than she knew she possessed. She did not know that the worst was still ahead. She did not know that sometimes the only way out of a burning building is to let everything else turn to ash. Chapter 2. I'd Rather Kiss My Dog. The Callaway Annual Gala was designed to remind the world that some families were born to rule. Soraya stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, staring at a woman she barely recognized. The gown Vivian had selected hung from her shoulders like an accusation, emerald silk that somehow managed to look both too revealing and completely wrong against her skin. The color was meant for someone else, cut for a body that had not yet begun showing the subtle signs of pregnancy, designed to make her feel exposed rather than elegant. Perfect, Vivian had said when the dress arrived, her smile suggesting anything but approval. It will certainly make an impression, the kind of impression that would have people whispering behind champagne flutes, comparing her to the appropriate women Thorne should have married. Wondering what temporary madness had possessed him to choose her, Soraya touched her stomach briefly, the gesture automatic now, a silent conversation with the only person who seemed to understand her loneliness. The baby had been moving more lately, small flutters that felt like questions she could not answer. What kind of life was she bringing this child into? What kind of mother stayed in a place where love had curdled into performance? Soraya. Delphine's voice carried through the door, sugar-coated venom. The cars are waiting. Don't make us late, don't make us late. As if Soraya controlled time, as if her very existence was not measured by how little inconvenience she caused them. She picked up the small clutch Vivian had also selected, empty except for tissues she suspected she would need before the night ended, and walked downstairs to where the family waited like judges prepared to deliver a verdict. Thorne stood by the entrance in a tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, and checking his watch with the impatience of someone for whom time was just another commodity. When he looked up and saw her, his expression flickered with something too quick to identify before settling back into its usual careful neutrality. "You're wearing that," he said. Not a question. An observation that somehow felt like criticism. "Your mother selected it," Soraya replied quietly. "Of course she did." He turned away, conversation over, and walked toward the waiting car. The ride to the venue was silent, except for Delphine's commentary about people who would be attending. Subtle reminders of social hierarchies and family connections that Soraya would never fully understand. Vivienne sat beside her son, occasionally adjusting his collar or offering strategic advice about conversations he should pursue. Easton scrolled through his phone, bored already, treating the evening like an obligation rather than the celebration it was meant to be. No one spoke to Soraya. No one acknowledged her presence beyond the physical space she occupied. The gala was held at the Callaway Foundation building, a structure of glass and marble that served as a temple to their generational wealth. Hundreds of guests had already arrived. The city's elite gathered to worship at the altar of old money and older power. Women dripped in jewels that could fund schools. Men wore watches that cost more than houses. And everyone performed the careful dance of networking disguised as friendship. "Remember to smile," Vivienne whispered to Soraya as they entered. "And for God's sake, don't embarrass us." The evening unfolded like a play Soraya had not been given lines for. She stood beside Thorn during greetings, nodding politely while people looked past her to address him. She smiled through introductions where her name was forgotten before it was fully spoken. She endured conversations where she was discussed rather than included, spoken about in third person while standing right there. "Where did you find her again?" Someone's wife asked Thorn, loud enough for Soraya to hear. "A charity event," Thorn replied, the words somehow making Soraya herself sound like charity rather than someone working at one. Laughter rippled through their circle, polite and pointed. Delphine appeared at Soraya's elbow with a glass of champagne, pressing it into her hand despite the baby growing inside her. "You look like you need this," she said sweetly, then leaned closer. "Try not to spill it on yourself this time. The cameras are everywhere tonight." Soraya set the glass down on a passing tray untouched, her stomach churning with something beyond morning sickness. The evening dragged on with the particular cruelty of events designed to look glamorous while feeling endless. Dinner was served in the grand ballroom, courses arriving with choreographed precision, while speeches praised the Callaway family's commitment to community. Vivienne spoke about legacy and responsibility, her words beautiful enough to disguise their emptiness. Thorn thanked everyone for their continued support, his speech polished and perfect, every word approved by his mother beforehand. Soraya sat beside him at the head table and wondered if anyone noticed she might as well have been invisible. After dinner, the orchestra began playing, and couples moved to the dance floor in pairs that had known each other for generations. Old money waltzed with old money, legacy families reinforcing connections that stretched back centuries, bloodlines preserving themselves through careful choreography. Soraya watched Thorn speak with a woman in red, someone's daughter from another appropriate family, laughing at something she said with a warmth he never showed his wife. Something inside her cracked watching him perform charm for a stranger, watching him become animated and present in a way he had not been with her in months. She made a decision born of desperation and foolish hope. She walked onto the dance floor and approached her husband, this man she had married believing love could survive anything, and touched his arm gently. "Dance with me," she said softly, the words almost a plea. Thorn turned, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into something colder. Around them, conversations paused. People turned to watch. The orchestra continued playing, oblivious to the moment unfolding on their floor. "I don't think that's a good idea," Thorn said. "Please." Soraya's voice barely carried over the music. "Just one dance." Something in her tone must have suggested she would not leave quietly, because Thorn took her hand with visible reluctance and pulled her into a parody of an embrace. They moved to the music stiffly, his body rigid with discomfort. his eyes scanning the room for rescue. Soraya tried to find something in his face, some remnant of the man who had promised her forever, who had held her like she was precious, who had sworn that nothing would come between them. She leaned closer, desperate for connection, for anything that resembled intimacy, and tried to kiss him. Thorn jerked away from her so sharply that she stumbled. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." The words cut through the music like a blade. Around them people heard. Heads turned. The dance floor began to clear slightly, couples moving away to give them space while simultaneously moving closer to hear better. Soraya felt her face burning, felt every eye in the ballroom fix on her humiliation. "Thorn," she whispered. "But he was not finished. You don't even meet my standards." His voice was loud enough now that pretending not to hear became impossible. "Stay away from me," laughter erupted. Not polite chuckling, but genuine amusement, the kind that happens when cruelty finds permission. Someone's phone flashed, capturing the moment. Delphine stood by the bar, her own device pointed at them, recording her brother's public dismantling of his wife. Soraya stood there frozen, her heart shattering into pieces small enough to disappear. She smiled because what else could she do? She smiled like the words had not just destroyed her, like she was not dying inside while everyone watched. The orchestra had stopped playing. The entire ballroom had gone silent. Hundreds of people watching this woman being humiliated by her own husband at his family's gala. Then something shifted in Soraya's chest. The smile stayed on her face, but what lived behind it transformed into something harder, something that had been waiting for permission to emerge. She looked directly into Thorn's eyes and spoke, her voice steady and cold enough to freeze blood. "You're right, Thorn. I don't meet your standards." The ballroom held its breath, "because my standards require a spine, and you've been living without one since the day we married." Gasps rippled outward like stones thrown in still water. "Your dog has more loyalty than you'll ever understand. At least when it looks at you, it sees a master. When I look at you, I see a coward who lets his family make his choices because he's too weak to think for himself." Vivian's face went white. Delphine's phone slipped in her hands. Easton stopped mid-sip of his drink. "You're not a man, Thorn. You're a puppet in an expensive suit, and everyone here knows your mother's hand is so far up your back that she can taste what you had for dinner." Silence. Complete absolute silence. "Enjoy your dog," Soraya said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "At least it has the excuse of being an animal." She turned and walked away, her head high, her spine straight, leaving Thorn standing alone on the dance floor with hundreds of people staring at him. She walked through the crowd that parted like water, through the grand entrance, down the marble steps into the night. Behind her, she heard the chaos beginning. Voices rising, Vivienne's sharp commands, Delphine's excited chatter, the orchestra attempting to resume playing, to restore normalcy to a moment that had just shattered it completely. Soraya kept walking. She had no car, no ride arranged, no plan beyond getting as far from that building as possible. She walked in an emerald gown and heels that were not made for distance, walked until her feet bled and her body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline. She walked until she could no longer hear the music. She walked until she could no longer see the lights. She walked until the mansion was far behind her and the city stretched before her like a question, without an answer. She walked until her legs finally gave out and she collapsed on a bench in a neighborhood she did not recognize. Her dress torn at the hem, her feet screaming, her heart empty of everything except the cold certainty that she could never go back. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking through the expensive silk, washing away makeup and pretense and whatever remained of the woman who had walked into that gala, still hoping for mercy. Soraya sat in the rain and laughed. Not happiness, but something wilder, something that tasted like freedom and terror in equal measure. She had finally said the truth out loud. She had finally let them see the rage they had spent 2 years creating, and now she had nowhere to go. The baby moved inside her, a flutter of life in the midst of destruction, and Soraya placed both hands over her stomach. "Just you and me now," she whispered into the rain. "We'll figure this out, somehow, but first she had to survive the night. First, she had to find shelter before the storm got worse. First, she had to learn how to stand after falling so far. The rain fell harder, and Soraya let it, because washing away the past seemed like the only way forward. Chapter 3. The Final Accusation. Dawn came cold and grey, the kind of morning that looked like punishment. Soraya sat on the bench where exhaustion had finally claimed her, her body aching from a night spent in wet clothes and terror. The rain had stopped sometime before sunrise, leaving the world damp and shivering. Her dress, that ridiculous emerald silk Vivian had selected to humiliate her, clung to her skin like shame-made fabric. Her feet were raw and bleeding from walking in heels, meant for ballrooms rather than escape. She needed to return to the mansion, not because she wanted to, but because everything she owned existed inside those walls. Her documents, her few personal belongings, the small amount of money she had hidden away from the allowance Thorn occasionally remembered to provide. She needed those things if she was going to disappear properly, if she was going to build any kind of life for herself and the baby. The baby. She placed one hand over her stomach, over the small swell that would soon become impossible to hide. Whatever happened next, she would protect this life. She would not let the Callaways use her child as another weapon, another tool to maintain control. A taxi finally stopped when she flagged it down, the driver's expression shifting from curiosity to pity when he saw her ruined dress and bare feet. She had lost the heels somewhere during her walk, left them behind like glass slippers that had failed to make her a princess. "Rough night?" he asked. "The roughest," Soraya replied, and gave him the mansion's address. The ride passed in silence. The driver occasionally glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but mercifully said nothing. Soraya watched the city transform from the neighborhoods where real people lived into the enclaves, where the wealthy hid from reality behind gates and guards. The mansion appeared through the morning mist like a mausoleum, all that stone and glass looking more like a tomb than a home. She paid the driver with crumpled bills from the clutch she had somehow held onto through the night, then walked up the long driveway on feet that screamed with every step. The front door was unlocked, which meant the family knew she had left, and had not bothered securing it against her return. That small detail told her everything she needed to know about her value here. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. The air felt charged, dangerous, like the silence before lightning strikes. Voices carried from the formal dining room, sharp and angry, the kind of argument that had been building for hours. Soraya moved quietly toward her room, hoping to pack and leave before they noticed her return. But Vivian's voice stopped her in the hallway. "There you are." The words were not relief or concern, but accusation. Soraya turned to find the entire family assembled in the hallway like a tribunal. Vivian stood at the center, her face carved from ice and fury. Delphine flanked her left side, phone already out and recording. Easton leaned against the wall to the right, arms crossed, expression suggesting entertainment rather than concern. And Thorn stood slightly behind his mother, his face unreadable, but his posture suggesting guilt and anger in equal measure. "We need to discuss what happened last night," Vivian said, her voice carrying the particular coldness she reserved for people she considered beneath her. "There's nothing to discuss." Soraya kept her voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. "I'm here to collect my things. Then I'll leave, and you'll never have to see me again." "Oh, I don't think it's that simple." Vivian took a step closer, and something in her eyes made Soraya's blood run cold. "You see, after your little performance at the gala, after you humiliated this family in front of everyone who matters, we discovered something very interesting." Delphine held up her phone, the screen showing a photograph of an open jewelry box. Inside sat a sapphire brooch, the kind of piece that appeared in museum exhibits and family legends. "That's your grandmother's brooch," Soraya said, confused. The one from the collection you showed me when we got engaged. Yes, Vivian agreed. The one you stole. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire just beginning. I didn't steal anything. Soraya looked at each of them, searching for sanity in faces that reflected only certainty of her guilt. I've never touched your jewelry. I don't even go into the vault room. Funny, Delphine said, her voice dripping false sympathy. Because I found this in your dresser drawer this morning? Tucked under your clothes like you were hiding it. That's impossible. Soraya's voice rose, despite her attempts to stay calm. I didn't take it. Why would I take it? I've been trying to leave, not steal from you. Maybe that's exactly why, Easton suggested, speaking for the first time. Wanted a little severance pay before running off into the night. Or maybe, Vivian continued, her voice surgical in its precision, you've been planning this from the beginning. Marry into our family, gain access to our home, steal what you could and disappear. It would explain why you made such a scene last night. Create drama, deflect attention, then slip away with our valuables. That's insane. Soraya looked at Thorn, the man who had promised to love her, to protect her, to choose her above all others. Tell them I would never do this. Thorn met her eyes for just a moment before looking away, and in that gesture, Soraya saw her entire future collapse. I don't know what to believe, he said quietly. You've been acting strange for months, distant, secretive, and last night you completely lost control. Maybe I never knew you at all. Strange. The word came out broken. I've been acting strange? Thorn, your family has treated me like a servant for 2 years. Your mother makes me serve at dinners while your friends laugh. Your sister films my mistakes to share with your social circle. Your brother brings his mistresses to family events and seats them next to me. And you have said nothing, done nothing. You stopped sleeping in the same room as me. You introduce me like I'm an embarrassment. You rejected me on a dance floor in front of hundreds of people and told me you'd rather kiss a dog than kiss me. So you stole from us in revenge. Vivian's voice was sharp enough to cut. That only proves my point. You never belonged here. You were never good enough for this family. I didn't steal anything. Soraya's voice finally broke, the control she had maintained for so long shattering like glass. You know I didn't. You all know I didn't. But the truth doesn't matter to you, does it? Nothing matters except maintaining your perfect image and making sure everyone knows their place. Careful, Vivian warned. You're making this worse for yourself. Worse? Soraya laughed, the sound harsh and painful. How could this possibly be worse? You've spent 2 years destroying me piece by piece, and now you're framing me for theft so you can what? Have me arrested? Ruin whatever reputation I have left? Make sure I can never challenge you or question you, or dare to think I deserve basic human dignity. We should call the police, Delphine said, her phone still recording everything. Let them handle this. No, Thorn said quickly, his first real reaction since the conversation began. We don't need police involved. That would create exactly the kind of scandal we're trying to avoid. Then what do you suggest? Vivienne turned to her son, her expression suggesting she already knew his answer, had perhaps even planned it. Thorn finally looked at Soraya directly, and what she saw in his eyes was not love or anger, but something far worse, indifference tinged with relief. As if her guilt gave him permission to finally stop pretending. She leaves, he said. Now today, she takes nothing but her personal clothes. No jewelry, no valuables, nothing that could be claimed as family property. She signs papers agreeing never to contact us again, never to claim any connection to our name, never to speak publicly about this marriage or this family. In exchange, we won't press charges. Thorn. His name was a plea, one final attempt to reach whatever humanity might remain inside him. I'm your wife. No, he said, his voice flat and final. You were a mistake I'm correcting. Sign the papers, take your things, and disappear. If you ever try to contact me, if you ever claim any connection to this family, I will prosecute you for theft and make sure you spend years in prison. Do you understand? Soraya understood. She understood that the man she had married had never existed, that these 2 years had been a long, slow death of something that was never truly alive. She understood that his family had won, had finally found a way to remove her that allowed them to maintain their righteousness while destroying her completely. "I'll need my documents," she said, her voice hollow. "My identification, my records. Easton will supervise while you pack," Vivian said. "1 bag, personal items only. Nothing of value, nothing of value." Soraya repeated the words like a prayer or a curse. "That's what I've always been to you, isn't it? Nothing of value." No one answered, because the truth required no confirmation. She walked to her room with Easton trailing behind her, his presence a guard ensuring she stole nothing else. She packed 1 small bag with clothes and documents, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the zipper. She took a photograph of her mother, long dead, the only family she had ever truly belonged to. She took the small amount of cash she had hidden away. She took nothing that could be connected to the Calloway name or fortune. When she emerged, Vivian was waiting with papers already prepared, legal documents dissolving their marriage and ensuring her silence. Soraya read them carefully, seeing her life reduced to clauses and conditions, seeing her future dictated by people who had never seen her as human. She signed them, not because she agreed, but because she had no lawyer, no money, no power to fight. She signed them because the alternative was prison or worse, and she had a baby to protect. "One more thing," Vivian said as Soraya turned to leave. "If you ever claim that child you're carrying as thorns, we will destroy you. We will prove you were sleeping with other men. We will paint you as a liar and a whore who tried to trap our family. Do you understand?" Soraya's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, protective, terrified. "How did you—" "Please!" Vivian's smile was vicious. "You think I don't recognize pregnancy when I see it? You think I haven't been watching you? That child is not a Calloway. It never will be. And if you ever try to claim otherwise, you'll learn exactly how ruthless this family can be when protecting what's ours." "It's not yours to protect," Soraya whispered. "This baby is mine. Only mine." Finally, something we agree on. Vivian gestured toward the door. "Get out. And if I ever see you again, I'll make you wish you'd stayed wherever people like you belong." Soraya walked out of the mansion carrying 1 bag and a heart that had stopped believing in anything except survival. She walked down the long driveway as thunder rumbled in the distance, walked past gates that closed behind her with the finality of a prison door slamming shut. She had no money beyond what little she had saved. She had no home. She had no family. She had nothing except a baby growing inside her and a rage that burned cold and pure. The storm broke as she reached the main road, rain falling in sheets that soaked through her jacket in seconds. She kept walking because stopping meant surrendering, and she had already surrendered too much. She walked until she collapsed on a street corner, the rain washing away tears she did not remember crying. She walked until a kind face appeared through the storm, a woman's voice asking if she needed help. She walked until arms that felt like safety guided her somewhere warm and dry. And when she finally stopped walking, when she finally let herself break completely, she was no longer in the world she had known. She was somewhere new, somewhere that might, against all odds, allow her to become someone other than the woman the Calloways had tried to destroy. Chapter 4. Rebuilding from Ashes. The bookstore smelled like paper and possibility. Soraya woke in a small room above pages and promises, disoriented by the softness of light filtering through curtains that were not heavy, velvet but simple cotton printed with flowers. The bed beneath her was not a massive thing with posts and silk sheets, but a modest frame with blankets that smelled like lavender and had been folded with care. The walls were not decorated with expensive art, but with photographs of places and people who smiled like they meant it. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, the storm, the collapse, the woman who had found her. Esther Okoye, who had introduced herself while helping Soraya inside, who had asked no questions beyond whether she was hurt, who had given her dry clothes and hot tea and a place to sleep without demanding explanations or payment. Soraya sat up slowly, her body aching from walking too far in the wrong shoes, from sleeping on a bench in the rain, from carrying grief that weighed more than any physical burden. A hand moved to her stomach automatically, checking, reassuring herself that the baby was still there, still safe despite everything. A soft knock came at the door. "You awake in there? I made breakfast if you're hungry." Esther's voice carried warmth without expectation, an offer that required no performance in return. Soraya stood on unsteady legs and opened the door to find a woman whose face was lined with years, but whose eyes held the kind of strength that came from surviving and choosing kindness anyway. "How are you feeling?" Esther asked. "Alive," Soraya replied, because it was the only honest answer. "That's a good start." Esther gestured toward a small kitchen table set with eggs and toast. Food so simple, it made Soraya want to cry after years of elaborate meals that had tasted like obligations. "Sit, eat, then we'll talk if you want to, or we won't if you don't." They sat in silence while Soraya ate, the food plain but prepared with care, each bite reminding her that nourishment could be an act of love rather than a display of wealth. Esther read a newspaper, giving Soraya space without abandoning her, presence without pressure. "Thank you," Soraya finally said. "For last night, for this, for not asking questions. Everyone has a right to their story," Esther replied, setting down her newspaper. "You'll tell me what you need me to know when you're ready, or you won't tell me at all. Either way is fine. I'm pregnant." The words came out before Soraya could stop them. A confession to a stranger that felt safer than any conversation she had had with the people who were supposed to be her family. "I figured," Esther said gently. "The way you kept touching your stomach, like you were protecting something precious." "How far along?" 5 months, maybe closer to 6 now." Soraya's voice shook. "The father doesn't know, doesn't want to know. His family made it very clear that this baby doesn't exist as far as they're concerned." "Then they're fools," Esther said with such certainty that Soraya almost believed her. "Any family that rejects a child before it's even born is a family that doesn't understand the first thing about love or legacy." Something in Soraya broke at those words. Some wall she had been maintaining finally crumbling. She cried then, really cried, the kind of sobbing that comes from deep places and carries years of accumulated pain. Esther moved around the table and held her, this stranger who offered comfort without conditions, who let her cry without trying to fix anything or demand explanations. When the tears finally slowed, Esther made tea and they sat together while Soraya told her story. Not all of it, but enough. The marriage that had been a lie, the family that had treated her like contamination, the accusations and the ultimatums, the papers she had signed, the threat that hung over her if she ever claimed her child belonged to anyone but herself. "What are you going to do?" Esther asked when the story ran out of words. "I don't know," Soraya admitted. "I have almost no money, no job, no family, no plan beyond keeping this baby safe." "Well," Esther said, refilling their teacups, "you have a place to stay for as long as you need it. And if you want work, I could use help in the bookstore. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest and it's yours if you want it." "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I could be lying about everything." "Could be," Esther agreed. "But I don't think you are. And even if you were, everyone deserves a chance to survive their worst day. Consider this your chance." So Soraya stayed. She worked in the bookstore, shelving books and helping customers, learning the rhythms of a life built on small kindnesses rather than grand gestures. She lived in the room above the shop, grateful for the modest space that was more home than the mansion had ever been. She saved every bit of money she could while her body slowly changed, her belly growing rounder, her movements becoming more careful. Esther taught her things the Callaways never had: how to budget when money was scarce, how to find joy in simple meals shared with people who cared, how to recognize the difference between wealth and value, between price and worth. How to stand up straight, even when the world tried to make you small. You're stronger than you think, Esther told her one evening while they closed the shop together. Stronger than they ever let you know. I don't feel strong, Soraya replied. I feel like I'm barely holding together. That's what strength looks like sometimes, Esther said. Not the dramatic kind in stories, but the quiet kind that gets you through one more day when you want to give up. You're still here, still fighting, still protecting that baby. That strength. The baby came on a night when rain fell soft against the windows. Esther stayed with her through every contraction, every scream, every moment of pain that felt like it would never end. When Soraya finally held her daughter, this tiny, perfect thing with eyes that somehow held both her parents' features, she made a silent vow. Your name is Amara, she whispered. It means grace, and I promise you'll grow up knowing real love, not the hollow kind I mistook for it. Amara's first months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Soraya discovered that love could be exhausting and terrifying, and the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced all at once. She worked in the bookstore with Amara strapped to her chest, learning to balance motherhood with survival, figuring out how to be enough for someone who depended on her completely. During those long nights when Amara cried and Soraya walked the floors of her small apartment, she thought about Thorn. Not with longing, but with something colder, something that tasted like understanding. She had loved a man who did not exist, had given her heart to a performance. The real Thorn was the one who had stood silent while his family destroyed her, who had chosen comfort over courage, who had condemned her without question, because that was easier than standing up to his mother. She stopped mourning what they could have been and started building what they would become. Her and Amara, a family of two, small but unbreakable. When Amara was 6 months old, Soraya started designing during the hours the baby slept. She made journals and planners, filling blank pages with quotes about resilience and strength, about surviving and rebuilding, about becoming who you were always meant to be. She wrote the words she wished someone had said to her during those dark years, the encouragement she had craved while smiling through cruelty. Esther helped her photograph them. They posted them online through a simple website they built together, calling the collection Baptiste Designs. The name felt like reclaiming something, like taking back the identity the Callaways had tried to erase. The first sale came from a woman across the country who wrote a message saying the journal made her cry, because it felt like someone finally understood. The second came from someone who said the quotes helped her leave an abusive relationship. The third, fourth, and fifth came faster than Soraya expected. Women finding her work and seeing themselves in the words she had written. You're touching something real, Esther said, watching orders come in. You're not just selling products. You're giving people permission to survive. Soraya worked harder then, designing through exhaustion, creating beauty from pain, transforming her worst experiences into tools that helped others. She hired a seamstress from the neighborhood to help with production. She found a printer who gave her fair prices. She slowly, painstakingly built something that was hers. 2 years passed. Then 3. Amara grew from infant to toddler, her laugh filling the apartment that had become home. Baptiste Designs grew from a side project into something real, something that paid bills and employed people and made a difference. Soraya moved into a small house with a yard where Amara could play. Nothing like the mansion, but infinitely warmer. She never spoke about the Callaways. When people asked about Amara's father, she said simply that it was not relevant, that they were doing fine on their own. When old acquaintances from her married life occasionally spotted her, she smiled politely and moved on, refusing to engage with a world that had rejected her. Some nights, after Amara was asleep and the house was quiet, Soraya looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked so different, though she did, but because the person she had become bore almost no resemblance to the woman who had walked out of that mansion broken and terrified. She had survived. More than survived. She had built a life from nothing, had raised a daughter in love, had created something meaningful from the ashes of her worst days, and somewhere across the city, in a world she no longer belonged to, Thorne Calloway was learning what it meant to fall, but that was his story to live. Hers was just beginning. Chapter 5. When Empires Fall. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning when the auditors arrived unannounced. Thorne sat in his father's old office, the room still carrying the scent of expensive cigars and older money, when his assistant's panicked knock interrupted his review of quarterly reports that had been looking increasingly concerning. Federal investigators wanted access to company records going back decades, something about irregularities that required immediate attention. Irregularities was a polite word for the kind of problems that ended dynasties. His father had died without warning, a heart that finally gave out from carrying too much weight and too little conscience. The funeral had been elaborate and empty, hundreds of people paying respects to a man they had feared more than loved. And then Thorne had inherited everything, the company, the debts, the secrets buried in filing cabinets that were never meant to be opened. Now those secrets were flooding out like poison from a punctured wound. The investigation revealed layers of financial misconduct, stretching back to his grandfather's era. Money laundered through shell corporations, employees cheated out of pensions, environmental damages hidden behind legal maneuvering, tax fraud sophisticated enough to have avoided detection for generations, but not sophisticated enough to survive modern scrutiny. Everything the Calloway empire had been built on turned out to be as hollow as the man who had created it. Thorne tried to contain the damage. He hired the best lawyers, the most expensive consultants, the crisis management teams that other wealthy families whispered about. But the tide was too strong, the rot too deep, and he was drowning in responsibilities he had never been trained to handle. His father had raised him to look powerful, not to actually be powerful. There was a difference, and that difference was destroying everything. Within months, the lawsuits began. Former employees seeking compensation, environmental groups demanding accountability, shareholders filing claims for fraud. Every week brought new accusations, new revelations, new evidence that the Calloway fortune had been built on a foundation of carefully maintained lies. The mansion went up for sale first. The place Thorne had grown up in, where generations of his family had lived and ruled, was seized by creditors and auctioned off to strangers who would fill it with their own memories. He watched from a distance as moving trucks carried away furniture that had been in the family for centuries, art that had hung on walls since before he was born, the physical evidence of legacy being scattered like leaves in wind. Vivian blamed him for all of it. She called daily from her apartment, smaller than anything she had ever tolerated, and listed his failures with the precision of someone who had been cataloguing them for years. "Your father would be ashamed," she said repeatedly, as if shame could be inherited like eye color or wealth. "He built this empire and you destroyed it in months." "He built it on fraud," Thorne replied once, tired of the accusations. "Everything we had was stolen or hidden or constructed on lies." "That's how empires are built," Vivian snapped. "The only difference between old money and new money is that old money is better at hiding its crimes. Your father understood that. You never did. You were always too weak for this world." Weak. The word she had used to describe him his entire life. The accusation that had driven every decision, every compromise. Every moment he had chosen silence over courage. Delphine abandoned the family entirely. She moved to Europe, changed her last name, and told reporters she had always felt suffocated by her family's expectations. She gave interviews about being the black sheep, the rebel who saw through the hypocrisy, rewriting history to make herself the hero of a story where she had been one of the cruelest actors. Easton disappeared after stealing whatever he could liquidate. Art jewelry, cash hidden in accounts only he knew about. He vanished into a life of excess and avoidance, spending the family's remaining assets on pleasures that would last exactly as long as the money did. Thorne was left alone to manage the collapse, to sign the papers that dissolved the company, to watch everything his family had built for generations crumble into dust and legal judgments. The social circle that had once worshipped the Calloway name now treated him like a cautionary tale. Invitations stopped arriving. Former friends crossed streets to avoid him. Business associates, who had once sought his approval, now spoke to him with barely concealed contempt or ignored him entirely. He took a job at a mid-level company, doing work that was beneath what he had been raised to expect. His boss was a woman named Patricia, who remembered exactly how Calloway Industries had treated its lower-level employees, and she made sure Thorne understood his new position with painful clarity. "You're not special here," she told him on his first day. "You're just another person trying to earn a living. Do your work, meet your deadlines, and maybe you'll keep this job." His colleagues mocked him openly. "How's it feel to be one of the regular people?" someone asked during lunch break. "Must be quite a change from having servants do everything for you." Thorne ate his lunch in silence, tasting humiliation with every bite of food from a grocery store rather than a private chef. He moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood he once would have considered dangerous or at least beneath him. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. The plumbing made noises that suggested imminent failure. The view from his window showed parking lots and street signs rather than manicured gardens and distant horizons. Every morning, he woke up in this small space and remembered the mansion, the staff, the luxury that had been so easy to take for granted. Every evening he returned from work exhausted and underpaid, understanding for the first time what most people had always known, that survival required constant effort, that comfort was a privilege, that respect had to be earned rather than inherited. His mother called less frequently as the months passed, each conversation shorter and more bitter than the last. She blamed him for her reduced circumstances, for the apartment instead of the mansion, for the loss of status that hurt her more than any financial damage ever could. "You should have fought harder," she said. "You should have been ruthless. You should have done whatever it took to protect this family, like framing an innocent woman for theft." The words came out before Thorne could stop them, months of suppressed guilt finding a voice. Silence on the other end of the line, heavy and dangerous. "What are you talking about?" Vivian's voice was carefully neutral. "Soraya, the brooch, the accusation that destroyed my marriage." Thorne's hands shook as he spoke words he had been avoiding for years. "Did you plant it in her belongings?" More silence. "Then that woman was poison. I did what needed to be done to protect you from making a catastrophic mistake permanent." "She was my wife." "She was nobody," Vivian corrected. "A gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. I simply showed you her true nature before she could do more damage." "She was innocent," Thorne's voice broke. "And I condemned her without question, because that was easier than standing up to you." "If you had stood up to me," Vivian said coldly, "perhaps you would have been strong enough to save this family when it mattered. But you weren't. You're weak, Thorne. You always have been. And weakness is why we lost everything." She hung up, and Thorne sat alone in his small apartment, understanding that his mother had just confirmed what he had suspected for years. Soraya had been innocent. Everything that followed had been built on a lie he had chosen to believe because the alternative required courage he did not possess. The nights were worst. Alone in the darkness, Thorne replayed every moment of his marriage, seeing it now through different eyes. Soraya's quiet endurance while his family tortured her. Her attempts to connect with him while he pushed her away. Her face when he rejected her on the dance floor. When he told her he would rather kiss his dog. When he let his family frame her for theft and threw her out into a storm. He remembered her words. "You're not a man. You're a puppet in an expensive suit." She had been right. He had let his family pull his strings his entire life, had chosen their approval over his own integrity, had sacrificed everything real for something hollow. One night, unable to sleep, he searched for her online. It was curiosity at first, then obsession. He found Baptiste designs, saw her success, read interviews where she spoke about resilience and rebuilding. She looked different in the photographs, confident, powerful, genuinely happy in a way she had never been during their marriage. Then he saw a photograph of her with a child, a little girl with features that looked hauntingly familiar, with eyes that could have been mirrors of his own. The realization hit him with the force of physical impact. Soraya had been pregnant when she left. The child was his. He had thrown his pregnant wife into a storm based on lies his mother had orchestrated. And now that child was growing up without him, without his name, without any knowledge that her father existed. The guilt nearly destroyed him. He started writing letters he never sent, apologies that felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. He drove past her business location, but could not bring himself to go inside. He watched from a distance as she built the life he had tried to destroy, and understood that he had lost something irreplaceable. His mother's voice echoed in his memories. "You're weak." She was right. He had been weak when it mattered most. Weak when Soraya needed him to be strong. Weak when his family demanded he choose between comfort and courage. Weak when love required sacrifice, and he had chosen silence instead. Now he understood what Soraya had endured for years. The isolation, the humiliation, the constant erosion of dignity, the feeling of being trapped in a place where no one saw you as human. He understood it because he was living it, experiencing firsthand the cruelty he had enabled through his cowardice. Colleagues mocked him. Strangers treated him with contempt. Former friends pretended he did not exist. Every day was a lesson in how the world treated people without power, without money, without the protection of inherited status. And every day he thought about Soraya and the child he would never know, and wondered if understanding could ever be enough when it came too late to matter. The answer, he was learning, was no. Understanding changed nothing. Regret fixed nothing. Some things, once broken, could never be repaired, and some people, once lost, would never come back. He had spent years taking her presence for granted, treating her like an inconvenience, letting his family destroy her spirit piece by piece. Now she was thriving without him, and he was drowning in the consequences of every choice he had made. This was justice, he supposed. Cold and complete and absolutely deserved. He had fallen from grace, and there was no one left to catch him because he had pushed away the only person who might have tried. Chapter 6. The Ghost. Returns. Thorne had been standing across the street from Baptiste Designs for 2 hours before he finally admitted to himself that he lacked the courage to go. Inside, through the large windows, he could see people working at desks, talking and laughing, creating something that mattered to them. And somewhere in that building was Soraya, the woman he had destroyed and who had somehow rebuilt herself into someone he no longer recognized. He had been watching her for weeks now, learning her patterns. She arrived early, stayed late, worked with an intensity that suggested passion rather than obligation. She smiled at her employees with genuine warmth. She moved through the world like someone who had earned her place in it. She was everything she had never been allowed to be during their marriage. A car pulled up, and Soraya emerged carrying a bag and her keys. Thorne's breath caught seeing her in person. She looked older but not worn, stronger but not hardened, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes and everything to do with genuine confidence. She was getting into her car when Thorne finally moved, crossing the street quickly, calling her name, Soraya. She froze with one hand on the car door, her entire body going rigid. Slowly, she turned to face him, and the expression on her face was worse than anger or pain. It was nothing. Complete, absolute indifference. Thorne, his name in her mouth, sounded like something dead. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you. I needed to talk to you about everything that happened." "No," She cut him off with a single word that landed like a door slamming shut. Whatever you think you need from me, the answer is no. Please, just listen. Thorn took a step closer and she took a step back. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did, what my family did. You understand. Soraya repeated the words like they were foreign. You understand now. After years of your family treating me like garbage, after you rejected me in front of hundreds of people, after you threw me out while I was pregnant. Now you understand. You were pregnant. The little girl I saw in the photographs, she's mine. No, Soraya said, her voice cold enough to freeze blood. She's mine, only mine. You gave up any claim to her the day you chose your family over your own wife. I didn't know you were pregnant, Thorn protested. If I had known, you would have what? Suddenly developed a spine. Soraya's composure finally broke. Don't lie to yourself or to me. You knew exactly who I was, and you condemned me anyway because that was easier than being brave. You're right. I was a coward. I let my family control me. I sacrificed you to maintain their approval. I destroyed the only real thing I ever had. And now you want what? Forgiveness? A chance to meet the daughter you abandoned? Soraya's laugh was harsh. You don't get that. You don't get to waltz back into my life now that yours has fallen apart and demand anything from me. I'm not demanding. I'm asking. I'm begging. There is no making this right. Soraya's voice went quiet, which was somehow more devastating. What you did can't be fixed with apologies. You destroyed me, Thorn. And the only reason I'm standing here whole is because I rebuilt myself without you. I know about my mother. I know she framed you. I know the theft accusation was a lie. Something flickered across Soraya's face. And how does knowing the truth help me now? Does it give me back the years I lost? Does it change the fact that you chose to believe I was a thief rather than trust the woman you supposedly loved? No, it doesn't change anything. But I needed you to know that I finally see the truth. Your understanding is for you, not for me. Soraya opened her car door. It's your attempt to feel better about yourself. But I don't owe you comfort. I don't owe you peace. I don't owe you anything except this truth. You are a stranger to me now. The man I married never existed, and the man standing here is too late to matter. What about Amara? Doesn't she deserve to know her father? Soraya turned to face him fully, fury in her eyes. Don't you dare use my daughter to manipulate me. Amara has everything she needs. She has a mother who loves her. She has people who show up for her. She has never once asked where her father is, because I've made sure she knows she's complete without him. She has my eyes, Thorn whispered. In the photographs, she has her own eyes, Soraya corrected. She is her own person. You don't get to claim her just because you contributed half her DNA. Fatherhood is earned through presence and sacrifice. You failed that test before it even began. Please. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but maybe over time, if I can prove that I've changed. Changed how? Soraya interrupted. Changed because your life fell apart. That's not change. That's consequences. Real change would have been standing up to your family when it mattered. But you didn't, and now you want credit for understanding what you did wrong. She got into her car, and Thorn moved to prevent her from closing the door. What can I do? Soraya looked at him with exhaustion. You can leave me alone. You can build whatever life you're going to build without using me or my daughter as your redemption arc. That's what you can do. I can't just forget you exist. Yes, you can, Soraya replied. You did it just fine when you threw me out. You're good at forgetting people who inconvenience you. Just do it one more time. I don't want to forget you. I want to find a way to apologize properly. Your growth is not my responsibility, Soraya said, her hand on the door handle. Your redemption is not my burden. I spent years trying to be enough for you. I'm done trying. I'm done caring whether you understand what you lost. I'm done with all of it. She pulled the door from his grip and started the engine. Through the window, she looked at him one final time, and what he saw was not hatred but something worse, complete emotional disconnection. Goodbye, Thorn. Don't contact me again. Don't show up at my business. If you ever actually loved me, you'll respect this boundary and let me go. She drove away, leaving him standing alone on the street with everything he wanted to say dying in his throat. His phone rang. His mother's name appeared. Thorne answered without thinking. "I heard you've been stalking your ex-wife," Vivian said. "People are talking. It's embarrassing. She's not my ex-wife. She's the woman I destroyed because I was too weak to stand up to you. Don't be dramatic. I did what was necessary to protect this family. We never had anything real," Thorne said, something in him finally breaking free. "We had money and status built on lies and cruelty. That's what Father taught me. That's what you perfected. And I'm finally understanding that everything we lost was never worth having. That woman has poisoned your mind, even from a distance." "She didn't poison my mind," Thorne said quietly. "She showed me what real strength looks like. She survived everything we did to her and built something meaningful. Meanwhile, we fell apart the moment our lies caught up with us. If you keep talking like this, I'll know you've completely lost your mind." "Maybe I have," Thorne replied. "Or maybe I'm finally finding it." He hung up on his mother for the first time in his life and felt something shift inside him. Not redemption or absolution, but the smallest beginning of understanding that changing himself was not about earning Soraya's forgiveness, but about refusing to be the man he had been. It was too late to fix what he had broken, too late to reclaim what he had lost, too late to be the father Amara deserved, but maybe it was not too late to become someone different than the coward who had destroyed everything real because he was afraid of what choosing love might cost. The journey would be long. The destination might not include forgiveness. But for the first time since his world collapsed, Thorne understood that some paths were worth walking, even if they led nowhere except toward becoming less of a monster than you used to be. Chapter 7. The poison spread. Soraya knew something was wrong when her business partner walked into her office with a face that suggested disaster. "We need to talk," Marcus said, closing the door behind him. He had been with Baptiste Designs from almost the beginning. His worry made her stomach clench with familiar dread. "What happened?" Soraya asked, already knowing the answer would involve Thorne somehow. The Harrison Group pulled out of the expansion funding. They sent a formal letter saying they're concerned about potential scandals associated with the company's leadership. "Someone's been spreading information about your past, about your connection to the Calloway family, about accusations of theft that were never formally resolved." The room tilted slightly. Soraya gripped the edge of her desk. She had spent years building Baptiste Designs, years creating something clean and honest, years putting distance between herself and the family that had tried to destroy her. And now Thorne's guilt was becoming as destructive as his cruelty had been. "It's him," she said. "It has to be him. Why would he sabotage your business?" "He's not trying to sabotage. He's just so focused on forcing his way back into my life that he doesn't care what damage he causes. He's been showing up places I go, asking people about me. And in the process, he's dredging up a past I worked very hard to leave behind." Her phone buzzed with a message from another contact, someone she had been courting for a potential partnership. The message was polite but clear. They needed to postpone their meeting indefinitely. Concerns about reputation, nothing personal, just business. Soraya read the message twice before setting down her phone with hands that shook. This was exactly what the Calloways had always done. Positioned themselves as victims, while the actual damage happened to everyone around them. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to end this," Soraya replied, standing up. "I'm going to make sure he understands that his guilt is not my problem, and his presence in my life, even from a distance, is not acceptable." She found Thorne's address through mutual acquaintances. The apartment building was modest, nothing like the mansion, but not poverty either. She buzzed his unit repeatedly until he answered. "It's Soraya. We need to talk now." The door unlocked. She climbed the stairs, her fury building with each step. When Thorne opened his apartment door, she saw the hope in his eyes and wanted to extinguish it permanently. "Soraya, Shut up," she cut him off, pushing past him. "You don't get to speak until I'm finished." Thorne nodded, closing the door quietly. You need to stop, Soraya said, her voice cold and controlled. You need to stop showing up places I go. You need to stop asking people about me. You need to stop trying to force your way back into my life because your guilt is eating you alive. I was just trying to understand where you've been. You never try to hurt me. That's the problem. You just think about what you want, what you need, what would make you feel better. You don't consider for even a moment what your actions cost the people around you. What are you talking about? I just lost a major funding opportunity because someone's been spreading information about my connection to your family, about the theft accusation, about scandals that supposedly follow me around. Soraya's voice rose. Business partners are pulling away. My reputation, which I spent years building from nothing, is being destroyed because you can't let go of your guilt. I didn't tell anyone about the theft, Thorne said quickly. You don't have to tell them directly. You just have to ask questions. You just have to show interest. You reconnect with people who remember the Callaway scandals, and suddenly everyone's talking about me again. Suddenly everyone's wondering if there's truth to old rumors. Thorne's face went pale. I didn't think about that. To what? To apologize? To meet the daughter you abandoned? Soraya demanded. Let me be very clear. Your redemption is not worth destroying what I've built. Your need to feel better about yourself is not worth more than my daughter's stability. Your guilt is not my responsibility to absolve. I know that. But I can't just forget you exist. I can't just pretend I don't have a daughter somewhere. Yes, you can, Soraya said, her voice dropping to something colder than anger. You did it perfectly when you threw me out. You're excellent at forgetting people who complicate your life. Just do it one more time and stay away from me. What if I can't? Then you're the same coward you always were, just wearing different clothes. She moved toward the door. You want to know what real courage looks like? Real courage is leaving someone alone when they ask you to, even when it hurts. Real courage is respecting boundaries. Real courage is accepting that some things you broke can't be fixed, and some people you hurt will never forgive. I'm trying to be better. Then be better somewhere, far away from me. Soraya opened the door, then turned back. You know what the worst part is? I spent years thinking about what I would say if I ever saw you again. I imagined telling you exactly how much you hurt me. And now that you're here, now that you're finally sorry, I realize I don't care anymore. Your understanding doesn't heal me. Your apology doesn't undo the damage. Your regret doesn't give me back the years I lost. Then what do you want from me? I want nothing from you, Soraya replied. That's the point you keep missing. I don't need your apology. I don't need to witness your transformation. I need you to disappear from my life completely. And if I can't? What if I need to be part of my daughter's life? Soraya looked at him with ice in her eyes. Then I will get a restraining order. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. I will tell Amara about you when she's old enough, and I will make sure she knows exactly why her father wasn't there, that he chose comfort over courage. Is that what you want? The threat hung in the air between them, real and sharp. You really hate me that much? He asked quietly. I don't hate you at all, Soraya replied, and the truth of it was more devastating. You're just irrelevant to me now. You're the man who used to hurt me, but I've healed enough that your existence barely registers anymore. So stay away from me, stay away from my business, and stay away from my daughter. That's not a request. She left before he could respond, walked down the stairs and out into the evening air that felt cleaner than anything inside that apartment. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline and rage, but underneath was something clearer, determination. She had survived the Callaway family once. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, and she would not let Thorne's guilt destroy it. Back at her office, Soraya drafted statements for the business partners who had pulled away. She explained that past associations did not define current character, that accusations made years ago should not be given weight, that Baptiste Designs stood on its own merits. She fought for every relationship, every opportunity, every piece of the life she had created. Some partners came back. Others did not. The damage was real, but so was her determination to survive it. That evening, after Amara was asleep, Soraya sat alone with a glass of wine and finally let herself feel the full weight of what Thorn's return had cost her. She had worked so hard to move past him, and his attempts to apologize had ripped open wounds she thought had healed. But she had also learned something valuable. She was stronger than she had been. Strong enough to tell him the truth. Strong enough to set boundaries. Strong enough to protect what mattered. Thorn's guilt was his burden to carry, not hers. His redemption was his journey to walk, not hers to facilitate. And if he truly wanted to become a better man, he could start by respecting her boundaries and leaving her alone. If he could not do that, then he was exactly the same coward he had always been. The choice was his, and for the first time since he had reappeared, Soraya felt certain that whatever he chose, she would survive it. She always had. Chapter 8, The Cruelest Truth. The call came on a grey morning when everything felt heavy with unspoken weight. Vivienne was dying. Not the slow decline of old age, but the rapid consumption of cancer that had been hiding in her body for longer than anyone knew. She had weeks at most, possibly days, and she wanted to see Thorn one final time before whatever came next claimed her completely. Thorn stood outside the hospice facility for a long time before going inside. His relationship with his mother had been complicated his entire life. Love twisted with resentment, admiration poisoned by understanding of her cruelty, obligation mixed with the growing awareness that she had damaged him in ways that could never fully heal. But she was dying, and despite everything, she was still his mother. The room smelled like antiseptic, trying to cover the scent of death. Vivienne lay in the bed, looking smaller than he remembered. Her body withered by illness, but her eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had ruled their family for decades. She gestured for him to sit, and he did. Perching on the edge of a chair, like a child preparing to be scolded. "You look terrible," she said. Her voice weak, but still carrying that particular edge she had perfected over years of maintaining control. "You're dying," Thorn replied. "I think I'm allowed to look upset." "Sentiment doesn't suit you," Vivienne said, but there was something in her tone that suggested she appreciated it anyway. "I don't have much time, so let's not waste it on pretending this is more touching than it is." "What do you want from me?" Thorn asked. "Nothing." Vivienne's laugh was bitter. "For the first time in my life, I want absolutely nothing from you. Everything I built, everything I fought to protect, it's all gone. There's nothing left to want." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of a lifetime of complicated love filling the space between them. Machines beeped steadily, marking time running out, moments disappearing into an ending that felt both inevitable and wrong. "Do you remember Soraya?" And the question came out before Thorn could stop it. Compulsive, driven by guilt that had been eating him alive for years. "Your mistake?" Vivienne's eyes opened wider. "Of course I remember her. Hard to forget someone who caused so much disruption." "She didn't cause the disruption," Thorn said quietly. "We did, you did, I did. She just existed, and that was enough for us to destroy her." Dramatic as ever. Vivienne shifted in the bed, pain flashing across her face. "She was a gold digger who saw an opportunity. I simply protected you from making a permanent mistake by framing her for theft." The words came out sharper than intended. By planting the brooch in her belongings and then accusing her of stealing it. Silence fell like a stone. Vivienne's face went carefully blank, the same expression she wore when negotiations went in unexpected directions. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Thorn leaned forward, years of suspicion finally crystallizing into certainty. "You knew she was innocent. You planted that brooch because you needed an excuse to remove her from my life, and theft was the perfect accusation. It made her look guilty. It gave me permission to throw her out. It ensured she could never come back." Vivienne was silent for a long moment, her breathing labored, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the room. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no apology, no regret, only cold calculation. "Yes, I planted it." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Thorn had suspected, had almost known, but hearing her confirm it destroyed something fundamental inside him. Why? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Because she was changing you, Vivian said simply. Because I could see you starting to actually care about her, starting to question whether our way of doing things was right. She was making you soft, making you think about things like compassion and fairness. That weakness would have destroyed everything our family had built, so you destroyed her instead. Thorn's voice was hollow. You framed an innocent woman for theft, threw her out, and threatened her if she ever came back. And you did it all to protect what? A family fortune built on lies. A legacy that collapsed anyway the moment it faced scrutiny. I did it to protect you, Vivian corrected. To protect our name, our standing, everything that mattered. That woman was nobody. She came from nothing. She brought nothing to our family except complications. Removing her was simply pruning dead weight. She was my wife, Thorn said, his voice breaking. She was pregnant with my child when you threw her out into a storm. And I believed your lies because I was too much of a coward to question you. Something flickered across Vivian's face then, something that might have been surprise. Pregnant? She never said, because she knew what you would do, Thorn interrupted. She knew you would use it against her, would force her to terminate or use the baby as leverage. So she left and raised my daughter alone, while I did nothing, believed nothing, questioned nothing. Because questioning you would have required courage I didn't possess. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her breathing becoming more labored. Did she keep it? The baby. Her name is Amara, Thorn said. She's mine. She has my eyes and my features and absolutely no idea I exist because I threw her mother out rather than stand up to you. She's growing up believing her father didn't want her, and she's right, because I chose you over her before she was even born. Good, Vivian said, and the word hit Thorn like a physical blow. That child would have been a constant reminder of your weakness, a link to someone who didn't belong in our world. Better that she grows up without you than contaminating our bloodline with her mother's common origins. Thorn stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're a monster. I always knew it on some level. But hearing you talk about my daughter like she's contamination, hearing you admit to framing an innocent pregnant woman without an ounce of remorse, I finally see it clearly. You're not strong. You're not protecting anything. You're just cruel, and you made me cruel by extension. I made you a Calloway, Vivian replied, her voice weakening but still carrying venom. I raised you to understand that family comes first, that maintaining our position requires sacrifice, that sentiment is weakness. If you're too foolish to understand that now, when I'm dying and everything is over, then you learned nothing from me at all. You're right, Thorn said quietly. I learned nothing good from you. I learned how to hurt people without remorse. I learned how to choose pride over love. I learned how to destroy everything real in service of something hollow. Those are the lessons you taught me, and I'm finally understanding how worthless they were. Then you've wasted your life, Vivian said. And mine. They stared at each other across the gulf of a relationship that had always been more about power than love, more about control than care. Thorn saw his mother clearly for the first time. Not the formidable woman who had ruled their family, but a dying person who had sacrificed everything human in service of maintaining an empire that crumbled anyway, I hope, Thorn said slowly, each word carefully chosen, that when you're gone, no one remembers you the way you wanted to be remembered. I hope they remember you as the woman who destroyed her son's marriage out of spite. I hope they remember you as someone who cared more about appearances than people. I hope they remember you exactly as you were, powerful and cruel, and ultimately meaningless. Get out, Vivian said, but her voice lacked strength. The command more plea than order. Gladly, Thorn replied, moving toward the door. Die knowing that everything you did to protect our family legacy only ensured it would be remembered as a cautionary tale about the cost of cruelty. He left without looking back. walking out of the hospice facility into rain that felt cleaner than anything inside that building. His mother's confession should have felt like vindication, like proof that Soraya had been innocent, like ammunition he could use to apologize more effectively. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something darker, that he had always known the truth on some level and had chosen to ignore it because acknowledging it would have required action. He had known his mother was capable of this cruelty. He had known Soraya was probably innocent. He had known his family was toxic, and he had chosen them anyway because that was easier than being brave. The rain fell harder, and Thorn let it soak him completely. He thought about calling Soraya to tell her about the confession, but what would that accomplish? She already knew she was innocent. His mother's admission changed nothing except confirming that every suspicion she had about the Callaways had been accurate. His phone buzzed with a message from the hospice. Vivian had died less than an hour after he left, her body finally giving out after years of carrying cruelty like a weight she refused to put down. Thorn felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a hollow space where love should have been. He had lost his mother years ago, long before cancer claimed her body. He had lost her, the first time he chose her approval over his own integrity. The first time he let her cruelty guide his actions. The first time he valued her opinion more than his own conscience. The funeral was small and sparsely attended. Delphine did not come back from Europe. Easton was unreachable. The people who showed up were business associates paying respects to a name rather than mourning a person. No one cried. No one shared warm memories. They simply stood in expensive clothes while someone read prepared remarks about Vivian's dedication to family and legacy. Thorn stood at the front of the nearly empty church and understood that this was his mother's true legacy. Loneliness dressed in expensive fabric. Power that evaporated the moment her heart stopped beating. A life spent maintaining appearances that no one bothered to maintain once she was gone. After the service, after the brief gathering where people spoke in polite platitudes before escaping as quickly as possible, Thorn returned to his small apartment and wrote a letter to Soraya, not to ask for forgiveness or to demand access to his daughter, but simply to tell her the truth his mother had finally admitted. He wrote about the confession, about Vivian's complete lack of remorse, about the calculated cruelty behind the theft accusation. He wrote that Soraya had been right about everything. His family had been toxic, his mother had been monstrous, and he had been a coward who chose comfort over courage at every opportunity. He ended the letter with words that felt inadequate but necessary. You deserved better than any of us ever gave you. You deserved a husband who protected you rather than sacrificed you. You deserved a family that welcomed you rather than destroyed you. You deserved love that was brave instead of conditional. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you needed. I'm sorry my mother confirmed exactly what you always knew. And I'm sorry that understanding this truth does nothing to undo the damage we caused. He sent the letter through Esther, the woman who had saved Soraya when he had thrown her away, and waited for a response that he knew might never come. Days passed, then weeks. Silence stretched into the kind of absence that felt permanent. Thorn continued his ordinary life, working his ordinary job, living in his ordinary apartment, existing as someone ordinary after years of believing he was exceptional. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand that his mother's confession had changed nothing except forcing him to confront a truth he had been avoiding. He had always known what kind of people his family were. He had always known. What he had done to Soraya, he had simply chosen to look away because acknowledging the truth would have required becoming someone different. And now, finally forced to see clearly, he understood that some truths came too late to matter, and some damage could never be repaired, no matter how much you finally understood what you had done wrong. Chapter 9. The long road to liberation. Thorn stopped waiting for Soraya to respond to his letter. Instead, he began the work of becoming someone different without expecting applause or forgiveness. He volunteered at a shelter for women leaving dangerous situations, spending evenings listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. Women who had been told they were worthless. Women who had been controlled by families who claimed to love them. Women who had chosen survival over comfort and were building lives from nothing. He recognized Soraya in every face, heard her story in every testimony. "What brings you here?" one of the women asked him during a group session, her skepticism visible. "You don't look like someone who understands what we've been through." "I don't," Thorne admitted. "But I understand what I did to someone I should have protected. I understand that I enabled a family who destroyed people for convenience. And I'm trying to figure out how to be less of a coward than I was." The honesty earned him a small amount of trust, enough that they let him stay, let him help organize donations and prepare meals and listen when they needed someone to acknowledge their pain. He started speaking at community centers about toxic family dynamics, using his own story as a cautionary tale. He talked about growing up in a family where love was conditional, where approval required sacrifice, where standing up for what was right meant losing everything you had been raised to value. "My mother framed my wife for theft because she was afraid I was changing," he told one audience. "And I believed the lie because believing it was easier than standing up to the woman who had controlled me my entire life. That cowardice destroyed my marriage, robbed my daughter of a father, and taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the most dangerous people in your life." The talks were difficult, each one feeling like peeling away layers of shame, but they also felt necessary, like paying a debt that could never be fully settled but deserved the attempt anyway. He created the Baptiste Initiative, using the small amount of money he had saved to fund a program providing resources to women starting businesses after leaving abusive situations. He named it after her not to win her favor, but because her story deserved recognition, because what she had built from nothing deserved to be honored. The foundation started small, but grew as word spread about a program that understood what survivors needed. Thorne worked on it during evenings and weekends, pouring energy into something that benefited people he would never meet. He sent Soraya letters periodically, never asking for responses, just sharing updates about the foundation and the people it helped. He told her about women who were thriving because they had been given the resources and support his family had denied her. "I'm not telling you this to earn points or to prove I've changed," he wrote. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know that your story mattered, that what you survived helped me understand what other women were experiencing. You don't owe me acknowledgement or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that something good came from understanding what I did to you." Months passed, then a year, then 2 years. Thorne continued his work without expecting Soraya's involvement. He spoke at conferences, wrote articles about recognizing and breaking cycles of family abuse, mentored young men struggling with the same cowardice he had embodied. "My father taught me that power mattered more than integrity," he told one young man. "My mother taught me that family loyalty required sacrificing anyone who got in the way. I absorbed those lessons so completely that I destroyed the only real relationship I ever had. Don't make my mistake. Learn to recognize the difference between loyalty and complicity." The work was exhausting and never felt like enough. Every woman he helped reminded him of the one he had failed. Every success story made him think about the success Soraya had achieved despite him. Every moment of progress felt shadowed by years of damage he could never undo. He stopped calling his mother's memory anything but what it was, a lesson in how love becomes toxic when mixed with power. He stopped pretending his family had been anything other than cruel. He stopped making excuses and started simply acknowledging that he had been wrong, had caused harm, had chosen poorly at every moment that mattered. The transformation was not dramatic or sudden. It was grinding and uncomfortable, like learning to walk again after years of moving in the wrong direction. It required confronting himself daily, accepting that good intentions did not erase bad actions, understanding that some days he still defaulted to the cowardice he had been raised to embrace. "Do you think she'll ever forgive you?" someone asked after a speaking engagement. "No," Thorne replied honestly, "and she shouldn't. What I did can't be forgiven with words or work. It can only be acknowledged and learned from. If she never speaks to me again, that's fair. That's the consequence of my choices. All I can do is make sure I'm not that person anymore," Soraya finally responded after 2 years of silence. The letter arrived through Esther, brief and carefully neutral, acknowledging the Foundation's work without acknowledging him personally. She wrote that several women had contacted her about resources they received, that the program seemed to be helping people, that she hoped it continued doing good work. The letter said nothing about forgiveness or reconciliation. It simply acknowledged that something positive existed. Thorne read the letter repeatedly, but found only exactly what she had written. A professional acknowledgement that his work mattered even if she could never trust him again. He wrote back thanking her and promising to continue the work regardless of whether she ever felt comfortable engaging with it directly. He told her that Amara would always have access to information about the Foundation if she ever wanted to understand what her father was trying to become. "Your daughter owes me nothing," he wrote. "She has a mother who gave her everything I failed to provide. If she never wants to meet me, that's her right. But if she ever has questions, I'll answer them honestly, including the parts that make me look exactly as cowardly as I was." He sent the letter without expecting a response and continued his work. The Foundation grew until it took over his life completely, until his small apartment was filled with files and applications and success stories. He lived simply, spent almost nothing on himself, poured every available resource into work that bore Soraya's name and embodied her strength. One evening, working late, he received a phone call from an unknown number. Esther's voice came through, warm and measured. "She read your letters," Esther said without preamble. "All of them. She wanted you to know that." Thorne's breath caught. "Thank you for telling me. I'm not calling for her. I'm calling for myself because I've watched this woman rebuild her life from nothing. And I've watched you try to become someone different. And I think you deserve to know that your work hasn't gone unnoticed, even if she can't acknowledge it directly." "Is she happy?" "She's building something real," Esther replied. "She's raising a daughter who knows her worth. She's created a life that doesn't need you in it to be complete. Whether that's happiness or something else, I can't say. But she's surviving and thriving." "Good," Thorne said, meaning it completely. "That's all I wanted to know." "One more thing," Esther added. "Amara found one of your letters. She asked about her father. Soraya told her a version of the truth, that you made terrible choices but are trying to learn from them. The girl wanted to know if you're a good person or a bad person. Soraya said you're a person who is finally trying to be good after being bad for a long time." The words hit Thorne with unexpected force. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but simple acknowledgement that change was happening even if it came too late to matter. "Thank you," Thorne said quietly, "for telling me, for helping her, for being there when I wasn't." "I didn't do it for you," Esther replied. "I did it for her. But you're welcome anyway," she hung up. And Thorne sat alone with the knowledge that Soraya knew what he was doing, that Amara knew he existed, that his transformation had been witnessed even from a distance. He returned to his work with renewed focus, not because acknowledgement had changed anything fundamental, but because he finally understood that this was the only path forward, continuous effort toward becoming less of the person he had been, creating positive change in a world he had made worse, proving through sustained action, rather than empty words, that growth was possible even after catastrophic failure. The road ahead was long. The destination might never include reconciliation, but for the first time since his world had collapsed, Thorne understood that some journeys were worth walking, even if they led nowhere except toward becoming slightly less of a monster than you used to be. And if that was all he could achieve, then he would achieve it thoroughly, completely. without expecting applause or forgiveness, just a man trying to be better than he was, knowing it would never be enough, but refusing to stop trying anyway. Chapter 10. The weight we choose to carry. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon when the world felt ordinary enough to be dangerous. "She wants to meet you," Esther said without introduction, her voice carrying weight that made Thorne's hands shake. "Amara, your daughter. She's been asking questions Soraya can't answer anymore, and they've decided it's time." Thorne sat down before his legs could give out. Years of work, years of transformation, years of hoping for exactly this moment, and now that it had arrived, he felt completely unprepared. "When?" he managed. "Saturday. Soraya's house. 2 hours supervised. No expectations beyond that single meeting. She's not doing this for you. She's doing it because Amara deserves to make her own decisions about who her father is." The conditions were clear and non-negotiable. Thorne agreed to all of them without hesitation, knowing that any opportunity to meet his daughter was more than he deserved and everything he had been working toward. The days until Saturday moved with the particular cruelty of time that matters. Thorne bought a small gift, reconsidered it, bought something different, reconsidered that too, and finally settled on a journal he had designed for the Baptiste Initiative. Something meaningful without being manipulative. He rehearsed what to say, discarded every prepared speech, and accepted that honesty without strategy was the only approach that had any integrity. Saturday arrived with clear skies that felt like a promise or a warning. Thorne drove to the address Esther had provided, a modest house in a neighborhood where families actually lived instead of simply displaying wealth. The yard had a swing set and evidence of a child's presence, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a bicycle with training wheels, the kind of normal life he had forfeited through cowardice. He knocked on the door with hands that trembled, and Soraya answered looking like everything he had lost and could never reclaim. She was different from the broken woman he had destroyed, and different from the powerful woman he had watched from a distance. She was simply herself, complete and whole, standing in her own doorway with the kind of strength that came from surviving and choosing herself anyway. "Come in," she said, her voice neutral, professional, giving him nothing except permission to enter. The house was warm in ways the mansion had never been. Photographs covered the walls showing Amara growing up, first steps, birthday parties, everyday moments captured because they mattered. Books filled shelves chosen for reading rather than display. Furniture looked comfortable rather than expensive. Every detail screamed home in a way Thorne had never truly understood that word until seeing it through Soraya's eyes. "She's in her room getting ready," Soraya said. "Before she comes out, we need to establish boundaries. You're here because she wants to meet you, not because you've earned the right to be her father. You answer her questions honestly. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't try to buy her affection or paint yourself as anything other than what you are." "Understood?" "Completely," Thorne replied. "And if at any point she wants you to leave, you leave immediately without argument or drama. Her comfort matters more than your feelings, always." "I understand." Soraya studied him for a long moment, seeing something that made her expression soften slightly. "You look different, older, tired." "I am different," Thorne said quietly, "though whether that matters is not for me to decide." Before Soraya could respond, a voice called from down the hallway. "Mama, is he here?" "Yes, baby." "Come meet him." Amara appeared in the doorway, and Thorne felt his heart stop completely. She had his eyes, but Soraya's strength, his features, but none of his weakness. She wore jeans and a shirt with paint stains, carried herself with curiosity rather than fear, studied him with an intelligence that suggested she had already formed opinions based on everything her mother had carefully told her. "You're my father," she said. Not a question, but a statement requiring confirmation. "Yes," Thorne replied, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm Thorne, your father, though I haven't earned that title through any actions that matter." Amara walked closer, examining him with the brutal honesty of children who have not yet learned to lie for comfort. You hurt my mama. She told me you made bad choices when she needed you. I did, Thorne confirmed, looking at Soraya briefly before returning his focus to Amara. I made terrible choices. I was a coward when I should have been brave. I chose the wrong things at every moment that mattered. Why? Amara asked, sitting down on the couch and gesturing for him to sit in the chair across from her, like she was conducting an interview. Thorne sat, aware that Soraya had positioned herself where she could watch both of them, ready to end this meeting the moment Amara showed any discomfort. Because I was afraid, Thorne said, choosing honesty over any story that made him look better. My family taught me that being strong meant never showing weakness, that love was something you gave only if people earned it, that caring about someone was dangerous if it meant going against what your family wanted. So when my family hurt your mother, I let it happen because stopping them would have meant standing up to people I was too scared to confront. That's stupid, Amara said bluntly. If you love someone, you protect them. Everyone knows that. You're right, Thorne agreed. It is stupid. And I've spent years trying to understand how I became someone who didn't know something that simple. Mama says you're trying to be better now. Amara tilted her head, considering. But she also says trying doesn't erase what you did. She's right about that too. I can work to become a better person, but that doesn't change the fact that I failed your mother completely. I threw her out when she was pregnant with you. I believed lies about her instead of trusting who I knew she was. I chose comfort over courage, and that choice meant you grew up without a father. I wasn't alone, Amara corrected quickly, protective of her mother. Mama made sure I had everything. And Auntie Esther and all of Mama's friends, they were my family. I was loved. I know, Thorne said gently. I can see that. Your mother gave you everything I should have helped provide. She made sure you knew your worth. That's all her, none of me. Amara was quiet for a moment, processing. Are you sorry because you feel bad, or because you know you were wrong? The question was so perceptive that Thorne had to take a moment before answering. When I first realized what I had done, I was sorry because I felt bad. Because my life fell apart, and I was lonely, and I missed what I had destroyed. But over time, working to help other people, understanding what your mother survived, I became sorry because I finally understood how much harm I caused. The second kind of sorry is the only kind that means anything. Which kind are you now? Amara asked. The second kind, Thorne replied. I'm sorry because I understand that I destroyed someone who trusted me. I'm sorry because I failed you before you were born. I'm sorry because I chose wrong when choosing right was the only acceptable option. And I'm sorry because I can never undo any of it, no matter how much I wish I could. Amara looked at her mother then, some silent communication passing between them. Soraya nodded slightly, giving permission for something. I wanted to meet you because I wanted to know if you were real, Amara said, turning back to Thorne. Mama told me you existed, but she also told me that some people talk about change without actually changing. I wanted to see which kind you are. And what do you think? Thorne asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. I think you're sad, Amara said after consideration. I think you know you messed up really bad. I think you're trying to be better, but you also know it doesn't fix anything. That's good, I guess. Better than pretending you didn't do anything wrong. That's very wise, Thorne said. Mama taught me to judge people by their actions over time, not their words in one moment, Amara explained. So I don't know yet if you're actually good or just good at talking. But I wanted to meet you anyway, because you're part of where I came from, even if you're not part of where I'm going. The words were devastating in their clarity. This child understood exactly what her father was. A biological connection without the earned relationship that made that connection meaningful. Can I show you something? Thorne asked, pulling out the journal he had brought. This is from a foundation I started. It's named after your mother because she's the strongest person I've ever known. We help women who are leaving bad situations start their own lives. Your mother's story taught me what was possible when someone refuses to give up, even when the world tries to break them. Amara took the journal carefully, opening it to see quotes about resilience and strength. seeing photographs of women who had succeeded against impossible odds. Mama has journals like this, Amara said. She makes them for her company. I know, Thorne replied. She inspired these. Everything good about this foundation came from understanding what she survived and using that understanding to help others. So you're using Mama's pain to help yourself feel better? Amara's question was challenging, testing, maybe partially, Thorne admitted. But also because if something good can come from understanding terrible things, then at least the terrible things weren't completely meaningless. Your mother deserved better than what I gave her. I can't change that, but I can make sure other women get the support she never had from me. Amara seemed to accept this answer, setting down the journal carefully. I don't know if I want you to be my dad. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I wanted to meet you so I could decide for myself, instead of just hearing stories. That's more than fair, Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. And whatever you decide, I'll respect it completely. You don't owe me anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not even basic kindness. Those things have to be earned, and I haven't earned them yet. Maybe you will someday, Amara said, with the optimism of children who have not yet learned that some things can't be fixed. Mama says people can change if they really want to, but she also says change takes years, not months, and you have to watch to see if it's real. Your mother is right about everything, Thorne said, looking at Soraya with something beyond regret, something that acknowledged she had become remarkable despite him rather than because of him. The meeting continued for another hour, Amara asking questions that ranged from basic facts about his life to probing inquiries about his choices. Thorne answered everything honestly, never trying to paint himself as better than he was, never making excuses that softened the truth. When Amara finally said she was tired and wanted to go play, Thorne stood to leave, grateful for even this small window into the life he had forfeited. At the door, Soraya stopped him with a hand on his arm. Thank you for being honest with her, for not trying to manipulate or charm your way into her life. She deserves honesty, Thorne replied. It's the only thing I can give her that has any value. Soraya was quiet for a moment, then said something that felt like the closest thing to peace they would ever achieve. I read your letters, all of them. I know about the foundation, about the work you're doing, about the transformation you're attempting. I can't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I can acknowledge that you're trying to become someone different, and that matters even if it doesn't change what happened between us. That's more than I deserve, Thorne said quietly. Yes, Soraya agreed. It is, but I'm not giving it to you for your sake. I'm giving it to myself so I can finally put down the weight of hating you. I carried that weight for years and it was poisoning me. I'm choosing to let it go, not because you've earned forgiveness, but because I've earned peace. She stepped back, creating distance that felt final. If Amara wants to see you again, we'll arrange it. But it's her choice, not yours, and it happens on our terms. You don't get to demand anything or expect anything. You show up when invited, respect boundaries without argument, and accept that this is all you get. I understand, Thorne said. And Soraya, for what it's worth, I'm proud of what you built. You became everything you were always capable of being, and you did it despite me trying to destroy you. That's remarkable. I know it is, Soraya replied with quiet confidence. I know exactly what I survived and what I built from ashes. And I know I did it without you, which means I never needed you to begin with. I just needed to stop letting you define me. She closed the door gently, ending the conversation, and Thorne walked back to his car, understanding that this was not the beginning of reconciliation, but simply acknowledgement that two people who had destroyed each other had somehow survived anyway, inside the house. Soraya sat with Amara and asked what she thought about meeting her father. He seems sad, Amara said, but also like he knows he should be sad. Is that weird? No, baby. That's just what it looks like when people finally understand what they did wrong. Do you think he'll be a good dad? Amara asked. Soraya considered the question carefully. I think he's trying to become a good person. Whether that translates to being a good dad is something only time will tell. But you don't have to decide anything right now. You can take all the time you need to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, you want with him. I'm glad I met him, though, Amara said. Even if I'm not sure about him yet. At least now he's real instead of just a story. That evening, after Amara was asleep, Soraya sat alone with tea and the truth she had been avoiding. She had forgiven Thorn, not in the way people usually meant forgiveness, not absolving him or welcoming him back or pretending the past did not matter. But she had released the rage that had been living in her chest, had stopped letting his betrayal define her worth, had chosen to remember what happened without letting it control what came next. She had forgiven herself for loving him, for believing his promises, for thinking she could change someone who was not brave enough to change himself. And in forgiving herself, she had finally, completely become free. Thorn had lost her not because she was not enough, but because he was not brave enough to choose her when courage was required. That was his burden to carry, not hers. She had built a life from nothing. She had raised a daughter in love and truth. She had transformed pain into purpose and survived when the world said she should break, and that was her victory. Becoming so completely whole that his presence or absence was just a footnote in her story. Not the story itself. She was Soraya Baptiste, and she had bent to no one while building her empire from ashes. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with reconciliation. Hers ended with something better. Freedom. And in the quiet of her home, surrounded by everything she had created and everyone she loved, Soraya finally understood that she had won the only battle that ever truly mattered. She had saved herself, and nothing, not even the ghosts of old betrayals, could take that victory away.